twice last night because after I had talked to Pat and talked to Henry and talked to Ray, so it's trying to come together. I joined recently, I think within the last couple of months, so I got, in a way, I try to get up to speed and trying to understand what this is and trying to help to scale this. My background, I'm very hands-on. I used to be certified auto mechanic to become an engineer. I can rebuild, all these diesel engines out in the field. I can certainly go power village by, using hands-on capability, including my engineering knowledge and business knowledge. So now I want to at least flash, this has not been vetted in terms of, is it our final mission statement? I would say we're mostly there. Really, we want to focus on renewable energy, technology, for deployment, to help this community in a sustainable way. I think, sort of copy from, I think Paul has a slide with a real similar statement in his presentation. I think that's what we're trying to do, right? But in a shorter term vision, when I talk to Dave, well, how big do we want to make this? And we say, well, when we look at the funding level that we're looking at about, trying to raise about $2 million a year, I think we can probably impact 50 million people in a 10-year time frame. Okay? So at least put it out there, say, hey, this is what we're trying to do. We may scale it up or adjust it as we go forward, understanding the fundraising and all that.
Yeah, that's really too low.
Yeah. So
I love Ray.
One of our strategies is really looking at, well, we want to deploy technology that, as affordable as it can be, right? As you can tell, I mean, it's still very expensive to deploy in remote villages, but on a relative scale, it's still workable. And then we also want to provide the business solution, to help you with a business model so that you're successful. And the goal is really, based on Ray's plan, is to implement about 10, pilot a year, what we call pilot. And if I estimate that, well, that's about $200,000 per pilot, roughly. We base our estimate on the Sunblazer model, but I think in the application, when you fill the application, you can benchmark across that, right? If it is a distributed solar grid, microgrid, you can do it more cost effectively, put it in your business plan, and we'll evaluate against that, right? So based on my knowledge working in American Lung Association, other nonprofit in the U.S., based on the work volume in terms of writing grant for grant application, processing application, it'll take about one full-time employee probably by next year. Okay, we can already look at it as, I think Ray's thinking, well, we can do it all with volunteer versus, okay. Or we actually need a full-time person really as the hub to coordinate all the activity with all the other folks. And as we scaled up, I estimate by 2015, we're going to need 2 full-time persons to do that. Just when you have too many people. Because at the same time, I think I have a vision to build a knowledge base as well, so that we can actually keep track of all the application and and allow people to submit information into a knowledge base that we can share. So we have a common focal point, whether it be from a business model or from a technology standpoint. And then I estimate the administration budget, based on, okay, if I have to hire 2 person full-time, what's the worst case, in a way, including a little bit of overhead. So if you look at the total dollar, well, it's less than 10%, about 10% of the overall funding that we're going to raise. So I think it's reasonable for any nonprofit to be operating within that range.
Well, I don't argue with you right now, but I'll argue with you later.
Okay, I know, these are all concepts, right? So really, I think when we start looking at the organization structure, we need to look at sort of the governance. Well, how is the organization going to work, in terms of fundraising, in terms of decision making, how we can make decision on evaluating, and who has authority to sign a contract with you, and so on. So those are the things that we're looking at. So based on the 3 potential scenarios that how the CSI structure will grow into the future, right? This is sort of the standalone model where, well, we're going to run CSI standalone by itself, okay, as a nonprofit. But we're going to have sort of the MOU with a technology kind of a subcommittee within PES here, where we still have technology support with CSI, but then most of the fundraising activity occur in a standalone organization the big dollar sign means, well, most of the funding is going to come externally, not from IEEE PES and not necessarily from, you know, a little bit maybe from the foundation, a little bit from PES, small amount, right, whatever reasonable, we can define that. But based on my sort of, you know, past working with fundraising, I think raising $2 million is not that difficult, okay? So like Paul said, right, that's not your problem to, it's our problem to raise the money, right? It's your problem to figure out the business plan on how you deploy in your area and demonstrate to us that you have the capability to scale up. You know, there's pros and cons, you know, in terms of how we set this up. I think below when we say NGO, I think Ray mentioned earlier in his slide, basically, well, we have to deal with a nonprofit organization, right? So we can probably help you how you structure below to tie the nonprofit to a for-profit, you know. So those are the things that you can probably, you know, deal with. So the contract that we're going to, you know, provide the funding to you will be based on between CSI as an independent organization and the NGO. So that's sort of the model. So it doesn't really conflict with the IEEE's mission in the membership support and so on, because you're still focusing on technology to help, you know, compared to a humanitarian sort of effort that's more focused with CSI. So another way that it can occur is that, okay, this is where we sit right now. You know, we sit sort of below, in a way, you know, CSI more or less can fit inside a subcommittee on the PES. But then if we do that, we'll be commingle fund from the outside, but we have the accounting system that we can set up to track that, so it's not a big issue. I think the bigger issue would be sort of the contracting authorization, because it sits within IEEE. That means we have no authority as a subcommittee to sign a contract, so the contract has to go back up. Well, you know, we can probably work through that, you know, but you know, the governance may become more of an issue in terms of decision on, do we want to have IEEE labeled as a humanitarian sort of operation, you know, within IEEE, how much of that, how much dollar can we afford to put it from the PES down to help if somehow the CSI is not successful and run into trouble. So there's some pros and cons in this sort of structure. But you know, this is something that Pat's going to take back to IEEE to kind of vet out to see.
Is this really a contract that we're talking about? I mean, I don't think we've dealt with contracts before. We've dealt with applications to the foundation for projects, and then somewhere in the hierarchy those got approved from something that I wrote. And that, you know, that's the extent of the contract. The contract was, that's approved, you manage that, you report back to us that you did what you said you were going to do. That was it. And I think that's pretty much how the Haiti situation, the surrender situation was handled. We did have contracts when we came, because of our development work, when we were in purchasing mode. We were writing all of that, and then we had an internal problem. But it wasn't a surrender problem, it was just our internal problem. That we had purchasing contracts set up with these companies to get that work done. And you know, we're kind of out of that mode now, at least at the moment. We're just talking about getting new money, moving a project through some formal process that's due diligence on the project. And then somebody in the foundation will say, yeah, okay, go. And we funnel the money, and we do it just like we did at Haiti. We do a project, we report back, we close that piece off. It's expected to be a 2-year process. So is that a contract? Is that an MOU?
Between Serona Cares, for example?
Right.
Well, I think one of the gray areas...
Contracts between IEEE and NGOs, that's
right.
question.
I think that is the gray area that Patrick is trying to address.
Yeah.
Can I just talk a little bit from personal experience on this one? The Serona CSI model is not applicable. We took on this stuff because of a relationship with Ray. And a total faith and trust that when Ray said, IEEE is going to deliver this, we believed him and trusted him. And he trusted us when we said, we're going to do this. We did it. And God help me, it was going to take an act of God for me to not let him down. The USAID grants that we're going through right now, I don't trust them as far as I can throw them. I need the contract, I need the first payment, I need the cash, I need to know my milestones, I need to know when I hit my milestones, I'm going to get my next slug of cash. And I think it's, you know, that's actually a model that when you're dealing with a stranger, with a new NGO that you don't have just a really strong personal relationship with, it's important that you both have those expectations.
Yeah, I think that analogy is a good one. That as you go out beyond the personal relationships, you need to define the responsibilities, and clearly the purchasing type of approach that you talked about, the production work for the trailers, you know, that we don't normally do that sort of thing, but we got it through our system, educated procurement people a little bit about what was going on and why we were doing what we were doing, and I don't know that any of that is a challenge per se, other than, you know, you got to do paperwork, period. Maybe there's a little more overhead to that kind of procurement stuff through IEEE. I've been in a lot of organizations that doesn't look too much more, but
we found a nice way to avoid that with the statement of work approach, and they asked statement of work just so the company could go ahead and it's like the company guaranteed a fixed price for a clump of work, and then they were awarded the money to do it, and they invoiced.
yeah, basically the simple way to do it with any one of the vendors, if we just stick on that before we go to the NGOs, there's a master service agreement with which is very generic. It goes to, it'll allude to intellectual property issues and whatever, but very generic. You can see from any corporation, I think. And then from there, you simply write a statement of works. Now, the only other check that goes with that is to make sure that's lining up. Internally, the checks will be, is that lining up to a funding source or to a program? So you have to roll those things up. But that just goes to a little more clarity. So if you're doing, just if I may, if you're providing 10 trailers to 10 different NGOs, you need to just figure out the alignment between funding for each of those, and then where are they going and why are they going there and that sort of thing. So I think from the procurement standpoint, it's like I believe you're alluding to as well, it's not that big of a challenge through the IEEE system. Your impression may be different. But when it comes out to the NGOs, this was where I was pushing for more of the strategic plan. What are those relationships going to be? You know, when it's not Sirona, how do you mimic that relationship in writing? And then if you get extremely flexible and you start changing it quite often, every one of those is probably going to need to have, you know, corporate review. More than likely, if you go off into another organization, you're still going to want a lawyer to be looking at every one of those. Maybe it's a volunteer lawyer or whatever the case might be. But you're still going to need that kind of due diligence for every relationship and make sure that it's nailed down. IEEE does stuff similar to that on a regular basis, but not quite, especially when you're transferring property. And then when does the ownership transfer? Normal contract stuff, right? Where does your liability start and end? So those things would need to be clearly articulated so that appropriate relationships can be established with those NGOs. I believe those are things you have to do anyhow.
Yeah.
Until IEEE got used to doing those with you and understanding the mission and things like that, I do believe there'll be a learning curve to that.
Yeah, also just, you know, the auditing of the people that donated the money, wanted to go, you know, where to go, right? I think having all the sort of formalized document would help you present to say, here's how you manage the dollar. Not just that, you know, we wrote a check for it, right? But what due diligence have you done to make sure the money got spent properly? Right. So the contract, how would you execute?
So one of the things we do, because we're inside the IEEE corporation, if you don't mind, I'll just point to it. Since CSI is part of PES, which is part of IEEE, we set up inside PES, just like the Scholarship Plus program, we set up a standalone cost center, and then we don't do that for any other things unless we have this commingling of funds that occur. And the main reason is that, you know, we can just run a transaction report and anybody can audit that and see where each dollar went out to. And that's why we try to not commingle overheads or anything else. So if we have staff, we put them in that cost center, whatever costs are there. To be fair, the only thing that doesn't go in there is we usually, whatever overhead is coming from myself and other staffers, we tend to leave that out of those programs, but that's the case. One last comment on the funding side, if I may, before we get too far from that. We've researched that best practices is about 15% overhead. If you can consistently not exceed 15%, you're in the best practices for someone doing serious deliverable stuff, not visionary or public relations type work. You may have other numbers in your mind, but
I just keep mine really low.
you always got to keep it low. But
yeah, no, I don't think I've ever gone beyond maybe 7%. So.
The other point, if we back up one slide, please, that in this particular case, we had a very nice discussion about in PES, it's technology orientation. We're helping to come up with technology solutions and support and that sort of thing. In this arrangement, that stays perfectly clear no matter what kind of businesses you're doing over here. I'm not promoting one model or the other, but here, as you go out to roll out, I want to light up 50 million customers or homes. I believe that model can be matched to IEEE's mission because humanitarian benefit is key. It's in our mission statement. So I think it can match up, but it becomes much more clear in this approach. And this group can work on new technology solutions, supporting the programs from a technology standpoint. So I think it can be done either way. IEEE will need an education and good, clear direction here. Liability would be the biggest thing. What are we doing? Are we spending money properly? So they'll be looking at it from this perspective. Are we delivering on the promises to the donor? We'll have very specific donor agreements with the foundation. This is how your money will be used. If we're overseeing it, then my job is to make sure that's being done properly for the foundation, because I'm the signature to the delegation of expenditure authority. So every dollar that moves, I'm responsible that it's being used appropriately for up here in this scenario. And that's why the paperwork and the clarity is so important. Otherwise, you have to figure that out every time. Yes,
how much autonomy would CSI have with the funds that are coming in from outside, not to PES or IEEE, but if Ray goes out and solicits funds, representing to them what CSI is doing?
Unsolicited funds, they will be solicited for the foundation.
For IEEE?
Yeah, if you look at our little brochure out there, it's all about contributing to this program by contributing to the foundation. Because we have this direct
But they would designate it for
earmarked fund.
earmarked
Foundation fund for us already.
Yeah, excellent point. So there's an overriding charter to the fund that's been set up here, that's been approved by the board. We tried to write it and went back and forth many times as high level as possible to give as much flexibility as possible, or at least that was the attempt when we wrote it. Hopefully we did that. All the money that goes in there should follow that charter. If you want to do something else, then you just simply ask the board, the foundation board, to approve another purpose, and then they would set up another fund so they're not commingled. To your point though, if you have a donor, and we have this, again, the analogy of the Scholarship Plus program, we have about 10 funds right now because they each align to a specific donor requirement. This money will be used in Region 1 of the U.S. only for scholarships. This money will be used in Canada. This one is for one outstanding student engineer in each region. So we have these kind of flavors, but there's $1 million behind that, so that was fine. And we usually only do that when the donation is significant. Otherwise, we ask the donors to follow the normal donor agreement. This is what you're contributing to, but if the dollars are significant enough, then it's relative. It's easier to justify a new sub-fund or fund for the foundation.
I think in our case, it will be common that people have a special interest in a special area of the world.
Mhm.
They want to see their dollars go there, their expats or whatever.
Right.
So that can be quite common, but on the other hand, we're talking about a fairly significant chunk of money going, like, we're talking $200,000 over a 2-year period for a new startup. And there's Cameroon, there's South Sudan over here, there's Nigeria over here. So quite likely, we would like to advertise it that way as, okay, here's a specific opportunity, we're shopping for the money right now.
Right.
Give me your bill.
And a $200,000 sub-fund that's specifically for Cameroon, for example, would be very easy to set up, especially it's staying within the charter of the original funding authority.
All of these.
Right. Yeah, so you could set those up very easily. If they're coming in at $10,000 a piece, you want to drive them into one of the other funds, sub-funds. And you're also going to want to look at pushing money into a general fund as well, so that you have flexibility to go and explore the next initiative, if you will, or next pilot project.
That's one of the things, I don't know if it's on the agenda today, but I think that process, it's actually that, whether it's the previous slide or this slide, that bar between the NGO and the entity, how you vet your NGOs and the time required to do that, I think needs to be factored into a budget. Because you're going to have, we have dozens of NGOs that contact us to do this. And we have to vet each one of them. And even like if we were to work with South Sudan or Cameroon, there's a process. This is step 1 in the process. Hi, here's what we're about, here's what you're about. Step 2 in the process, and that usually leads to, this is what we need you to do. And then we go out again. And then we're like, did you do what we asked you to do last time? The answer is no. We're like, thanks, it was really a pleasure to meet you. But I just spent $10,000 to get that far. And that's, that's something that needs to be factored in.
So what I would recommend is that each of those major processes, especially since you have such an expert project manager sitting here as well, as all those other skills, you can fix your car and do your project management, is that you identify those major processes that you're talking about, the development of an NGO, that whole process, and where do you want to take it to, right? So ultimately, what is that agreement you want it to look like? And then you put all of this into an implementation plan. And they can be separate components for different parts that you're doing, but it's really critical. Besides the strategic planning portion that you're doing now, an implementation plan allows everyone and share it with the world. Your donors are going to want to see that. We had doors that would open enough for us to talk to them on the Scholarship Plus program, but once they saw the detail, how does the student get the check? Does it come through the university? Does it go directly? Little things like that. Yeah. And all of a sudden, oh, I could write that check, right?
Yeah.
And we had to modify
several iterations, and we got really detailed.
Yeah, and it's, you get a group that's going to work on this part, let's say. They work on their piece, right? Each part of the process they work on. How are you going to advance, give feedback on your designs? What are you going to do there? They can be black boxes to start. But then as you find volunteers interested in each of those components, write it up, share it with everybody. You want to comment on that?
Operationally, it's so convenient to always go back to the implementation plan. We couldn't remember what some of the rules we set up, but we knew it was in the implementation plan. We could always just go back and look at that to see what our guidelines were. So.
And obviously you can modify it, but you don't want to modify it on a daily basis, but so you stay on track. But it was really, really empowering when it got in place.
Right. So this is kind of, it could be the current, sort of organization structure, how we actually evolved into now. But I thought about a third option, sort of, well, instead of setting up CSI as a separate 501c3, Archbury Foundation is already a 501c3. Why don't we put the humanitarian portion over? And then we still have the same MOU with the PES, so that it doesn't restrict the mission of the CSI. Because today we may focus on just solar trailer, but in the future, hey, we might want to grow a little bit. So this kind of, in a way, a happy medium for, there's something to consider, to say, hey, we still tie closely with the IEEE, and so we still can leverage the grant, and it doesn't limit, in terms of how we use the fund as much as sitting within PES.
Let me comment on some implications here. You didn't share this before, so I didn't think about this ahead of time. But right now, when we have the CSI group here completely, you know, the funds are coming down here. As I mentioned, this is run as a standalone unit. But what we're really doing when we spend the money that's in the foundation is we're a purchase service to the foundation. They have no staff here. Oh, I'm sorry, here. No staff whatsoever. There's a board. They utilize the services of IEEE's development office. Inside that development office, there's different types of resources. They utilize the services to plan their meetings for them, you know, get the food and beverage and do all those contracts. So the accounting is done here, everything's done here for the IEEE Foundation. So looking at this, you would need to make sure that you had
We're self-sufficient.
Self-sufficient,
in a
but
way,
also
we can actually have synergy to help the foundation. If I have a full-time staff there.
you could, but they'll be looking at it from many, many, many different levels that they get services out of here, from auditing to financial reporting, legal services, whatever.
I don't think we need to go to that right now.
This is our problem to solve in the next few months in terms of, I think, in terms of sort of the relationship and the partnership, I want to jump quickly to sort of, well, what does that
Is
look
the
like?
NPSS CSI subcommittee different from the PES subcommittee? Slightly to show us just today. The NPSS.
So I want to talk about sort of, okay, what is the partnership like between CSI and the NGOs, right? Really, we have our roles and responsibility. The NGO has roles and responsibilities. Our job is to raise the fund necessary to pilot the project so that it can be replicated. And then along the way, we need to support technology, the business planning, sort of monitoring, set up the milestone payment goal for you, and set up the standard contract so we can work with you. Those are the things that we wanted to be able to monitor. Okay, the funds actually spent and verified, and kind of at that point, that's the demarcation, right? We gave you money, we verified it's spent, according to what we structured.
We're running a little over time.
Okay, all right, and then you have your responsibility to submit your business plan, right, based on multi-year business plan, and then take the liability with the equipment that you purchase based on you have to meet all the rules and regulation, environmental, and other issue on hazardous waste and all that. So basically, the partnership agreement will become a standard contract document. I foresee maybe a 3 to 5 page document, which is a really huge document initially, just to tie down these issues, right? In terms of how funding should occur, when do we pay you, and how do we terminate a contract if you didn't perform or we didn't give you the funding according to the time limit and things like that. So, and then the application step would be basically, I think we start those discussion, and I think it would be good to co-develop a high-level term sheet, single page, to say, this is what we're looking at, right? Then once we get some agreement, then we can say, okay, I think we can actually let you fill out an application form, tell us who you are, and so on, and then submit the application with all the relevant information. We add it and tell you and say, hey, looks like you have all the information you need. Looks like it could work. Then we can sit down and draw up these agreements and kind of formalize it that way. So I developed an application form, just a couple of pages, and basically, just basic information, mission statement, and a little bit about your organization. And then there's a page that's a checklist of things that you need to submit. A little history about, no different than any grant application that you have to fill out. So I would say nothing special about it. And then there's a little bit of description on all the terms that need to fill out, how you fill out the forms. I would say relatively simple for a 2-page document to fill out, and then add whatever you have already with your organization. So that's, I want to kind of end here. Right? We can talk about more in detail later if we have time.
Very good. Thanks. So, thank you. When